Well, hello. My name is Glenn Trosh, and this is my daughter, Katie Trosh. We own and run a company called Psychedelic Art Exchange. We're an online retailer that deals in vintage concert posters, specializing in the 1960s, but selling everything from American roots music to current day. We host an auction where we last year auctioned 4,000 different posters and items. So come check us out, concertpostergallery.com, and welcome to our introductory episode of our podcast, Unrolling the Concert Poster, where we intend to explore themes and take deep dives on concert posters because each one of these posters has its own story. So we're going to kick off the podcast with, focusing on provocative images in posters. And there's certainly nothing more provocative
yes,
than this image.
Which is one of the, most historic concert posters of them all, I'd say. It's not even a concert poster.
No, it's not a concert poster, but it is a poster by the innovator of the psychedelic concert poster, Wes Wilson, who was an instrumental part of the whole 1960s San Francisco scene. He was responsible for the first 50, 60 posters for Bill Graham and the Fillmore. And, his story is deeply connected to everything that we talk about here. He really was the innovator. But in 1964, he created this poster. This was his first poster. And this copy is a limited edition screen print that he did
in
later
2016,
yeah. The original is a very scarce poster, very tough to get, and also it's one that people have difficulty understanding. So that's what we want to talk about here.
Why don't you give a little bit of like the background on why he did this, how he came up with the idea, why it's so provocative? I mean, I'm sure you can see why, but there's a lot of history there.
Well, I wish I had had the chance to discuss this with him, more deeply when he was around. But to my understanding, Wes was, a conscious individual, and he was witnessing what was going on in America at the time in 1964 with Vietnam and, the whole political social situation. And this was a very bold statement. And I mean, in some ways, this is still relevant today. In fact, I posted an image of this on social media the day after the 2016 election, and I got, a lot of feedback.
Oh, yeah? What kind of feedback?
I mean, people were shocked. Some were angry. It was, it's weird, but I mean, it's strong. That is as strong a graphic as there is.
Yeah, and for those of you who are listening on audio formats, I'll just describe it briefly for you. It's got the American flag colors on it. It says, "Are we next? Be aware," and it has a swastika right in the center of it. So certainly not something that you would see, posted around anywhere today, which is entirely fair. It's a lot to take in.
Well, that's part of the conversation today, is that the way that we perceive things today is different how they were perceived in 1964. Also, the whole element of America fighting the Nazis in World War II. And now, we're at a position in the world where authoritarianism and fascism is rising its head again. So it's it's a deep poster, and it could take up a whole episode, but there's a whole lot of connecting themes through this poster that we will explore in this episode. As I mentioned, Wes Wilson was the originator of the psychedelic concert poster.
I think often referred to as the godfather of the psychedelic concert poster.
Yes. I mean, there was the Seed, which was a poster that, preceded what he was doing by a couple months. And the whole thing was sort of a groundswell. But then when Bill Graham and Chet Helms opened the Fillmore, Wes was the chosen artist. And when they split to different venues, Wes worked for both of the promoters. He worked for Bill and he worked for Chet. Chet did the art direction early on, and so it was sort of it wasn't all of Wes's vision. The Fillmore stuff he had a lot more latitude on and explored slowly. The evolution of the poster through Wes's work, the early Fillmore stuff, is really remarkable, and it should be explored. And we'll look into further episodes here.
Yeah.
But we're going to go straight to the last poster that he ever did for Bill Graham. This is BG62. He did a couple later on, but they're they're like 50, like 151 or 150, and they're not that evocative. But this is certainly an evocative image. So Wes's story is he was the the house guy for Bill Graham, and Wes felt that he wasn't getting compensated adequately for the for the work, and this was sort of his message to Bill Graham. It's an image of his pregnant wife holding her belly and her hand outstretched, and then there's this snake with a $sign. Bill was perceived of by Wes as a capitalist pig. And then we have this, we have the swastika right in the middle here.
So it ties these two posters together. And I mean, going back to the Are We Next a little bit, that was the first poster he ever did, correct?
Correct, yes.
And it was just a reaction to Vietnam and everything that was going on
and
there.
his social awareness and whatever his head, he was it was a bold statement. He was really, as was much of the community at the time, they were opposed to what was going on in American politics and the industrial military complex and all of the stuff that had built up to the conflict. And it was part of the culture to oppose these structures. So anyhow, back to the BG62. BG62. I mean, it's a Grateful Dead poster, and it's increased in value significantly over the years. It's split fountain printing, which means that the colors, fade into each other, and it's a powerful poster. It's one of the most important posters in the Fillmore Bill Graham story, because Bill Graham was an interesting character.
Yeah.
He was a concentration camp survivor. He lost his mom in Auschwitz. He and his sister tried to escape. Bill made it, came to America.
Yeah, at 10 years old.
10 years old. And then I guess we pick up the story in 1965 in San Francisco, where Bill became the manager for the San Francisco Meme Troupe, which was a politically active group. They were pressing against these themes as well. And how he got to the Fillmore was he started having benefits for the Meme Troupe after they had been arrested for performing in the park without a license. And Bill had these Meme Troupe benefits, and they're the very first pieces. They're super scarce, impossible to find. But this was when he realized something was going on, and the swell of people and interest. And this was in '65 when he had these Meme Troupe benefit concerts. In early '66, he got a lease on the Fillmore for the first few shows, shared it with Chet Helms, and then, began the San Francisco music scene. And he was, I mean, it's funny, he was not well loved at the beginning. There's, because of this impression that, capitalism is wrong and money is wrong and whatever the ethics of, that community were. And, it started very innocently. The whole San Francisco Haight-Ashbury culture was very organic. It was bohemians. They were beats that started taking acid and got a little more colorful. And one of the best stories is Kesey's meeting of Bill Graham. Ken Kesey, who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and took that money to buy an International Harvester school bus.
Mm-hmm.
And you all should know the rest of the story. But anyhow, again, we'll have plenty of time to explore these themes later on. But Bill's story is what I want to talk about today because it ties all of this together. Mm-hmm. So he was a Jew. He escaped Nazi Germany. He came to San Francisco in '65, mm-hmm. and went on to create 287 concerts at the Fillmore, or at least there's 287 in the series. There were midweek shows, there were a few events and stuff, but all in all, from 66 to 71, he was the promoter of San Francisco, mm-hmm. and really, went on to be the greatest rock and roll impresario of all time. And so Bill is critical to all this. Yeah. And
there's that connection with Ken Kesey, which I think is important to
oh yes. Yeah. Well, so the Kesey, the Trips Festival, which was January of '66. It was put together by Stuart Brand and the Pranksters, and everyone was kind of involved in it. And it was an acid test with paid admission. Mm-hmm. Allegedly. Well, up to Bill Graham. It was up to Bill Graham to collect the door. And this was, where he had this tussle with Kesey, because Kesey was opening up the back door and letting in pranksters and friends and angels and stuff. And Bill approached him and kind of gotten in his face. And the story goes that Kesey was wearing a spaceman helmet, mm-hmm. and, as part of his costume. And Bill went up to him, and Kesey just flipped down the visor, turned away. Bill eventually had the last laugh, the history of Bill Graham and the Grateful Dead and Kesey, it was all, it lived on until Kesey left, and then Jerry left in '95. So it was, it was family, and it was a weird family. It had Hell's Angels. It had the whole San Francisco, weirdness scene. And it was a beautiful thing. And, part of this community was also, like I say, the Hell's Angels, mm-hmm. and they had a certain impact on, the community and whatnot. And the symbolism followed them as well.
Yeah.
So, and this hits close to my story on some level as well.
Right.
I am, my father was the son of an immigrant that also was escaping violence of Jewish people. My grandmother as well lost most of her family in the camps. And my dad was, a little boy growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which had a significant German population. And my dad met with, a lot of hatred and a lot of anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. And so, it's critical to his story. He had, an uncle in Chicago who was a baker who was German. And, somehow I've saved these all. He was a German soldier, so I have like these medals from, my father's uncle that was part of, he was a German soldier. This was before,
Yeah, and my grandfather, your father, fought in World War II as well.
Yeah, he got shipped off. He was like a 5'5" man, and he got shipped off to the, to Japan, the Pacific. Yeah, mm-hmm. And it was duty. Mm-hmm. It was what was done. It was the right thing to do. And he came back like all these soldiers, and on the GI Bill, went to college. He, went into his father's business, and then created, an incredibly successful business over the years, which, went away in the year 2000. It was called the Maryland News Distributing Company, where we were wholesale distributors of periodicals. And my dad was an industry leader, and he was, yeah, he was a conservative businessman. He was a Republican, this was what he did, but he was also a fierce First Amendment advocate.
Right.
And he was always, believed in righteousness and justice. Well, Melvin's now 99.
Just had his 99th birthday a few weeks ago. Yeah.
And yeah, we wouldn't be here having this conversation if it were not for him. And so all of this plays into this, which is why, I believe that we can speak about it with some understanding and credibility.
The qualifications are there.
And context.
Yeah. Which is, context is what we're here to discuss at the end of the day.
Yes, when it
comes to the provocative imagery, which we got Are You Next? We have more that we'll show you here in a bit. But.
So let's show something else. As we discussed earlier, the Hells Angels were part of the the San Francisco bohemian scene. It goes back to, I guess, Kesey and the Pranksters. They were part of that thing. It was always this sort of interesting, slightly uneasy partnership, but they were there, and they were, there were famous angels, Chocolate George and
that's a good name,
Freewheelin' Frank, and they were beloved. I mean, they were, and yes, the Hells Angels is a complicated story. Again, it's a motorcycle gang, violent motorcycle gang, and their origins, I mean, it's tied into Americana as well. The 1953 film The Wild One with Marlon Brando was sort of the introduction to this whole motorcycle gang culture. And they were down for the party too. I mean, they were all about the party, and that's how they ended up integrating with the San Francisco scene. It was just like the best party ever. And they had, the benefits throughout the years where the Dead would play, and, there were a lot of benefits and angel parties where the rock bands played. And one of these was this annual party, and it was a benefit for the Clap Clinic. So, and here we see some disturbing imagery as well. We have a swastika again, and
there's just a bunch of skulls. One of them has a swastika on the side of the head,
and there's a woman lying on top of a skeleton. This poster was done by Randy Tootin, who was another one of the Bill Graham poster artists, and another super important artist that we'll explore in greater depth. Sure. But this poster is, relevant to this conversation. And, the Angels, it was an uneasy relationship, and it all kind of, I don't know, came to a head. But the incident at Altamont Speedway in '69, where, the Angels were hired as security and ended up, murdering a person.
A great rock and roll tragedy.
Yes. And it's sort of romanticized as the end of the 60s.
Right.
Yeah. So the Angels are certainly part of the story, and a certainly very interesting subculture. And and some of the posters are exceedingly valuable. But it's a part of the story that needs to be told. Again, if you want to get greater depth, read the electrocolate acid test. It sort of has the story. Tom Wolfe, that was how I found out about all this. I think I read that book when I was like 14 or 15, and it was all
required reading if you're gonna keep listening.
For sure. But so that being said, this is the next poster we want to talk about. Is it requires real thoughtfulness and understanding, because again, on the surface it may seem shocking, but we have to take into
context,
take into account context.
and art and artistic license and free speech and
truth,
all of that.
Right. Well, now we get to the point where the story gets really fun and interesting, because we're about to talk about
the main course.
I mean, Led Zeppelin, in many people's minds, the greatest rock band ever. I mean, and they changed the whole course of rock and roll. I mean, they were the introduction of the whole arena stadium rock thing. They, and they started, as many people understand, as the Yardbirds, morphed into Led Zeppelin, and within a matter of years became the biggest thing on the planet. Now, the poster that we want to talk about today is from 1971, and as you can see, the image is a little bit bold. Again, it's Adolf Hitler advertising a Led Zeppelin concert, but this is one of those pieces where context and history is even more important. First of all, Zeppelin were no fans of Nazis, and the Brits were no fans of Nazis. We have to remember that Germany declared war on the world twice. And so this is a spoof. This is parody.
Yeah.
The word balloon that says Danke Baedeker, that's the story here.
It's one of them.
One of the stories here, yes. Baedeker's travel guide was a German travel guide to England. And it showed all of the historical sites that were very dear to the Brits. Hitler, when he wanted to bomb Britain, wanted to get them where their hearts were. So he went for these historic sites and referred to Baedeker's travel guide. And one of the sites was Canterbury because of the rich history with that part of England. And Rutherford College was in Canterbury. So Danke Baedeker, I mean, it was a spoof because the guy used a travel guide to plan the Blitz. So it's just another one of those,
It's history.
Yes.
It's wild. And it's worth mentioning that, I mean, this poster is rarer than almost anything that we've ever seen.
Oh yeah, this is one of those top tier pieces. I mean, only a handful exist. And we have one auction result from 2018 where we found that it sold for $26,000.
Yeah.
That was 2018. This poster is shockingly rare, shockingly shocking. And it's a badass poster too. I mean, it's very pulpy and fibrous and screen printed, and it really is. It's I don't know if it picks up on film, but it's very textural. It's almost like a velvet Hitler.
Yeah. Well, it turns out that there's a pretty good story about the whole event and the band as well, which it was 1971. They were 3 albums deep. They were already really famous, but they decided to do a tour in the UK of small venues to keep ticket prices low for fans. And they were slated to play Rutherford College. They sold out 1,000 tickets in advance. They were going to play in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
It
sold out.
Sold out instantly. And then, the fire department came in and was like, you can only have 600 people in this space. And so they scrambled. They thought about canceling. They thought about relocating to somewhere in town. Eventually, they decided to keep it at the college to prevent, getting sued by the band for, ending the contract. And they didn't want to anger fans. They were afraid that, these 400
there were threats from bikers, and that that it was going to get weird and violent, and and then they hired this ad hoc security team too.
Yeah, they switched it from the cafeteria to be in the sports hall, and they hired like a ragtag security team. And when the day of the show came, the security team tried to prevent the band from entering because
they thought they were ruffians. They thought Zeppelin, which I mean, look,
it's hilarious. It's great.
I mean, Zeppelin definitely had a reputation of badass. Their manager, Peter Grant, was a no mess around guy. He was, famous for being a super tough negotiator. And then when he had the biggest act in the world, he got to the point where he demanded 90% of the gate
Right.
for Zeppelin
Yeah.
and left the promoters with 10%, which was unheard of in entertainment at that time. So, you know, the Peter Grant was responsible in many ways for this band getting where they were. And this sort of pivots to the next poster we want to talk
yes.
to. This is, you know, a well-known story, but it's worth you know, it draws together the two elements that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin and Bill
6
Graham.
years to
Yes.
77.
77.
And, you know,
They
even
were
more famous at this point,
Yeah.
even more well-loved, more albums, and playing in Oakland.
This was, you know, Bill Graham, Day in the Green, Oakland Stadium. You know, this was a huge venue. And it was, you know, it was a big deal. 2 shows in Oakland. And on the first show, there was an incident. Peter Grant's son allegedly had, you know, picked a dressing room sign that said Led Zeppelin off of one of the dressing rooms. And one of Graham's people supposedly gave him a little smack. And this didn't sit well with Peter Grant and his people. And the story goes that, yeah, they threw the gentleman that was responsible for this incident, locked him into one of the dressing rooms, and beat him to a pulp.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Bill Graham was going to press charges, and he did. You know, he did. There was a police report, and then Zeppelin came and said, if you don't drop the charges, we're not going to show up for the second show, which would have caused a major riot.
Sure.
And so, you know, they wanted to be indemnified, and Bill agreed to it. So the second show would go on. He changed his mind later on, and it was eventually settled. But this is one of those rock and roll stories. This is a poster by Randy Tootin.
Yeah, we're coming back to Randy Tootin again.
And this is a progressive print. This was something used by the printers to get the colors right. Offset lithography. And this is the blue pass. And the poster is, it's one of those essential posters. If you collect Bill Graham, if you collect Led Zeppelin, this poster is essential. And, this is one of those posters that we sell often in our auction. It's becoming increasingly scarce. It's becoming increasingly more valuable. And this is why we're telling the story, because even though we've been immersed in these posters and this culture all our life, we understand that really the world at large has no idea about this. So it is our hope that through these discussions that we'll be able to introduce people to this amazing collectible. It really is rich. And if you love rock and roll, if you love art, if you love collecting, this is a great place to play. So come check out our scene at concertpostergallery.com.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and subscribe to our channel, and we'll be back soon.
Thanks again.
Thank you.